Good morning, everybody. I want to start this talk by making a distinction that I've come to make. You know, we make distinctions. It's like you distinguish this from that, and when you distinguish this from that, then it allows you to put attention into it. It's like, you can look at at words that we use as conveying, their representations of certain meanings or something. But we can also understand the words as ways we shape our attention. Because Anyway, I'll say this much and then you'll see what I mean. So I make this distinction between life and aliveness. And life and aliveness are, kind of the same thing. And yet, I allow these two words to carry my attention differently. And so I just want to share that, and you can see if you can make use of it. The Diamond Sutra says that there is no lifespan. And that's a kind of outrageous statement, It's like, humans and living beings are, living beings in general are born and then they live and then they die. And that's a lifespan. And I am a living being, and so it's kind of crazy to say that I have no lifespan or there is no lifespan. It's like the Heart Sutra. When the Heart Sutra says no eyes, no ears, no nose, you say like, oh, really? There's, I have eyes, there's seeing, and I have ears, and I hear sounds, and it's like, that's equally outrageous in that sense, because it makes no sense compared to our, in relation, to our ordinary experience. So, clearly, the Diamond Sutra is a revered text. We could put it aside and say, it's, forget about it. Or you have to direct your attention differently to make sense of what is meant by no lifespan. So let's examine this situation that we're in right now. There are, so the emphasis is on right now. The situation we're in right now. And when you bring attention to the situation that you're in right now, that you are right now, then what do you find? You find sensorial content. You find things to see. You find sounds that you're hearing. You find tastes and smells and bodily sensations. you find mentation. Buddhism includes the mind into the group of the senses. So we have 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and mind. That's the model. I think the model of the 6 senses is problematic because when you speak of the body and touch, you basically refer to the skin as a sense organ, right? Because it's. But there is there are bodily sensations that are, I call them proprioception, but I understand that it's somewhat problematic to use this word proprioception because it's used a certain way in psychology and physiology. Proprioception means usually the body's sense of location in space. But I like the word proprioception because it means self-perception, basically. Proprio means self, right? So the body sensing itself is what I call proprioception, both as a location in space, but also in all kinds of other ways. That's usually called interoception, the body sensing its insides, interoception. But I don't like the idea of inside and outside, so I just want to stay with proprioception. But I understand it's not quite the use that's established right now. So all I'm trying to say right now is the skin as a sense organ, as a touch, is not making clear that there is also this proprioception, the body sensing itself. Well, you could group it with mind and say the body sensing itself is a form of mentation. But that's not usually how we use the word mind. We use the word mind for thoughts and maybe more developed feelings that we call emotions and so forth. But anyway, you can see if you start to examine what is going on here now, you end up with some model to observe what's going on. In other ways, words that shape and direct attention. And sometimes we have to change the model because we're starting to observe something that there isn't a category for, and then we need a new category to shape our attention to also touch that portion of our experience. So it's kind of an open process, right? It's not like there's some fixed way to do this. There's just tradition that can give us a little confidence and guidance in how to do this. But really, it's what I'm trying to do right now is just to say, what am I finding? So I'm finding sights and sounds and tastes and smells and sensations of touch and also proprioceptive sensations and mentation. And attention isn't resting on all of these all at once. It goes from one to the next, and you see something, then you hear something, and it kind of blends together, and it makes, what should we say, an experiential display. And this experiential display is changing all the time. The contents are coming and going. And in the midst of this coming and going, there is a sense of here-ness. that stays. Do you get that? There's an awareness of the contents that isn't coming and going. It's staying in the midst of all that coming and going. And I have come to call this here-ness the field of mind. And so you have this basic structure of the field of mind and the contents of mind. The contents of mind are coming and going, and the field of mind is staying, at least relative to the contents, it's staying. And this situation of the field and its contents is what I call aliveness. Or that's one way I could define what I mean by aliveness. If you can shape your attention in such a way that you can notice the sensorial content and the field in which the sensorial content appears, here, the now as this here of your experience, there's no past. And there's no future. It's just this. When attention is shaped this way, there is no lifespan in the experience. That's how I understand what the Diamond Sutra is pointing to. The past is a content in the field of the present. As you are tuning yourself to experiencing the sensorial content of the present that includes mentation, I think it's kind of obvious to recognize that what we call the past is content in the present. It's a memory, or it's a narration of what has happened. And where does that narration or and memory, where does it occur? It occurs in the field. It occurs in the field of mind. As an image, as a storyline, a combination of the two. And likewise with the future is content in the field, in the present field of mind. It's like thoughts about where to go next, or where to be in 5 years, or projections, of trends, or that's what the future is. And the future also happens in the present. So this is, I think, an orientation toward our life that the Diamond Sutra is trying to sort of nudge us into by declaring that there is no lifespan. And I call it aliveness. I think that it works for me because if I feel into my aliveness, it's a kind of proprioceptive feeling of this body breathing and being alive that just immediately brings me to the present, because you can only feel the body in the present. You can't feel the body in the past, and you can't feel the body in the future. So, because past and future are mentation, the body as a medium of the present, works, the alive body. So aliveness just immediately brings me back to this. And then, I think we do have a life. And from the point of view of aliveness that I've just pointed out, it's like your life is a kind of constant narration of bits and pieces of the past and the future. There's a lot of stuff that has happened to us, and we have memory of some of it, conscious memory of some of it, and we kind of like narrate bits and pieces of it to us. We never, this is my observation, I never narrate the whole thing to myself. It's not like, if you were doing this all the time, it's like you would have no other, you would just constantly sit at your desk and write your autobiography over and over again or something. It would be surprising to do that because it would be changing all the time. So I think we actually, like when people say story or, narrative, it's just bits and pieces of doing it, and it's like, and then it appears like there is such a thing as a life story. Even if you wanted to write your autobiography, some people do that, you have to edit a lot. Because otherwise, if you've lived for, 50 or 60 years, it may take 50 or 60 years to write it. If you wrote something about every moment. I think this situation of this ongoing narration of our life is like being in a talk show or something, and there's a host that asks, "So, what have you been doing?" And you start somewhere. It's like, "Oh yeah, well, I've been doing such and such and such and such, and I've not been feeling so well, or I've been feeling really good." You recognize this kind of talk, and then what are you up to? The host says, right? It's like, "Oh yeah, well, this and that's on my mind, and I need to do this, and I have this problem that needs to be fixed, and these kinds of issues." And then if you want to step out of the shallow talk with the host, you start to reflect on some deeper dimensions of your situation. You say I'm doing all these things, but I'm doing these things, but I have this dream, and what I'm doing isn't quite matching up with the dream that I have, and I don't know how to get to fulfill the dream that I have with what I'm doing, but I'm doing what I'm doing, that kind of, this thing goes. And the reason I'm not doing what I'm doing is because this kind of stuff happened to me in the past, and I'm still trying to work this out, and I don't have the confidence, and like that. What I experience when this happens is like there's a weaving of ideas about the future with what happened in the past, and you just kind of weave it together, and it's not the whole story, it's just like a momentary weaving, a momentary situational weaving of past and future into something that hopefully makes sense. And, I'm not trying to, I do make light of it right now, but I'm not trying to dismiss it. I think that is actually our life. That's what I call life, but in distinction to aliveness. So just take a sense. I mean, some human experience like failure or success, and access it through these two words, aliveness and life. You can fail and succeed in life because you can set a goal and miss it, or create a future and then reflect back on what you did and say, I didn't live up to my idea that I had 10 years ago, and now that 10 years are over, then you compare what you thought to what happened. So you can fail or succeed in that sense. But in aliveness, you can't fail. There's just the field of mind, and then there are contents, and the contents are coming and going. There's no failure there. There's also no success. We're in this as humans. We're in this weird situation that when we think of ourselves as having a life, then we can, run after certain projected goals and then succeed or fail, or when we succeed, then we also fail because what we thought the fulfilled goal was going to do for us is, evaporates just the minute you succeed in fulfilling it, and then you kind of need a new goal. It's this weird situation in which life in this structure becomes inherently unfulfilling. Or is in danger of becoming unfulfilling. I'm not saying that is true for everybody, but it's true for many people. I think from this observation, a certain task emerges. Let me call it that, a task. But maybe it's just an opportunity. It's like, maybe we could say, the opportunity or the task is to give aliveness to life. This is like Ram Dass, Dick Alpert, the Harvard psychologist who turned spiritual guru, he had this slogan in the, 60s, 70s? Be here now, right? This is the same idea. It's like living in the present moment, which has become such a cliche. Live in the present moment. Yeah, okay. I've heard that before. So we've got to, we have to rediscover the value of this again and again. Right now I'm describing the same idea with different words of aliveness, bringing aliveness to your life. To start to see how you can maybe locate yourself in this present moment as a here, a sphere of experience. And shift to that sphere of experience or its here-ness as the location from which, our life unfolds. There are certain qualities of aliveness that I find they are disturbing and promising at the same time. Anyway, I'm just trying out words here. I don't quite know how to talk about what's on my mind. Aliveness, the field and its changing contents, is self-fulfilling. It doesn't need anything outside of itself. You have this experience. It sounds maybe it's obvious to you, but maybe it sounds spiritual or weird or redundant even. I don't know. It's simple things, like you step outside the door and you feel the spring breeze on your body, and that's self-fulfilling. It's not like you need to place this experience into some extra context of meaning to experience it as fulfilling. So with a pleasant experience, we welcome it easily and experience a sense of aliveness that just comes from, I'm being touched by the spring breeze. Okay, if you have a more challenging, painful, unpleasant experience, that's harder because there can be a habit of rejecting that experience and saying like, I don't want that, and that doesn't make me feel alive, but that's delusion. This is not true. Unpleasant experiences are, you could say, also just a certain excitement of the field of mind. And they represent your aliveness just as much as the pleasant experiences do. That is an acquired taste. That takes practice. But I'm just pointing right now, again, I'm trying to shape our attention in a way, is like the field of mind, this field of aliveness is self-fulfilling in the sense that it doesn't need anything outside itself. There is, the potential that I say it's disturbing and promising, because the disturbing part is, I need to accept pain. And the promising part is that maybe there is a way to experience a certain unconditional aliveness or unconditional contentment that comes from discovering that both pleasant experiences, pleasant content, and unpleasant content are both expressions of aliveness. And therefore fulfilling in a way. Now, another quality of this aliveness is it's undivided. So, there's a spiritual cliche that you can articulate as we're all one. And it seems to suggest that deep down there is a no, let me say it differently. It seems to suggest that separation is a delusion. That separation doesn't exist. That self and other are not separate. You need to push it and feel the click. Yeah, you know what to do. Thanks. The door just blew open from the spring breeze. If I just take my experience the way it comes to me, sort of in a not exactly obvious way, but undeniable way, I would say that we are both separate and connected. Or you could also approach this by saying we're neither separate nor connected. It's like this, I like to talk about this is because it's so obvious. If you have a boundary between two sides, right, left and right, or the US and Mexico, the boundary, the border, simultaneously connects the two sides and separates the two sides. It depends on how you look at it. So Zen is trying to point to this situation that we're in, existentially in, as not two. So we're not one, but we're also not two. Okay, right now I call this aliveness experience is undivided. It's like, on the one hand, it's clear that I, as an embodied person, have my own perspective that is different from yours. And I pay my bills and you pay yours. But at the same time, it's clear that we're in it together. We're all in it together. Actually, not just what we think of all beings are in it together. All things and all beings are in it together. Interdependence, you've heard of it. Okay, so it's being located as aliveness is self-fulfilling, it's undivided. There's this connectivity without denying the separate perspectives. And it's, I would also say it's indeterminate or open. Means it's not clear what's coming next. You could call it, it's unpredictable. Again, unpredictability is both disturbing and promising. Indeterminacy is both disturbing because that means you're not in control. You don't know what's going to happen to you. It's open. It's indeterminate. But it's promising because it allows change. Things can become different. they're alive. It's not going to stay the same. Just don't know how. It's unclear. And I would add that as another quality, this field of mind, this aliveness in which contents come and go, it's also a responsive. There's a quality of responsiveness. There's this Zen saying, that basically, I don't know, I'll just say it without qualifying it. It's like, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. As if that's like enough advice for life. Right? I don't know, it seems a little bit, to live a human life seems a little bit more complicated than that. But no, it's about recognizing the responsiveness of aliveness. When there's hunger, there's a way to respond to that. When there's tiredness, there's a way to respond to that. Now, isn't that true for everything? Now, you could say, if you are attached to life, then you would say, there are situations in which there is no response possible, but only because you have determined the outcome already in advance of staying alive. But let's say you are ill, right, with a disease that threatens your life. There comes a point when the response is to give in to dying. What's wrong with that? I mean, if you're not attached to staying alive, then that could be just as clear a response to surrender to the disease, could be just as clear a response as when hungry, eat. So I'm just pointing out is there is a responsiveness built into our aliveness that is pervasive. It's all encompassing. It's promising, to say there's a responsive order here. It's promising in the, I sometimes try to point to this responsive order as carrying I try to name it and say it's carrying the present into the present. How? So if you shape your attention as aliveness, it's like there's this constant question basically. What or how to take the next step? What is the next step? How to take it? It's disturbing because it's like you're not ever let off the hook. It's not like there's a time when there is no need to, find the next step. It's promising because it suggests to us that there is a basic competency in each of us to live our lives, to live out our lives as aliveness. It's like, how can we connect with this capacity as a kind of confidence? Now, again, if you are attached to an idea that you should be successful in your life in a certain way, that is a certain bias. Then you can fail. But from the point of view of aliveness, there is no failure. There's just living out this indeterminate openness, in a responsive way. That can be, if you discover it, that can be self-fulfilling. Maybe this is a complicated way of speaking about freedom. Freedom not as a freedom from limitations and an ability to always get what I want, but a freedom within changing circumstances of our life. There's because I pointed out this simple, but, well, it seems simple, but it's, as an embodied practice, it's not easy. This simple structure of the field and the contents. There's the field that stays and the contents that are coming and going. There's a basic choice here. If I locate myself more in the field and less in the contents, I will experience what Buddhism calls non-attachment, because I can allow the contents to come and go and feel located in the field. If I'm identified with any content, that could be even the past or the future or who I think I am or what I think the world should be like. These are all contents. And if I'm attached to those ideas, or I'm attached to, my car, for it to not get scratched or for it to be seen as a status symbol or whatever, I don't know, I'm just making a bad example, or maybe good example. It's, that would be an identification with the contents. And so every time we get into trouble with, getting stuck in life, there's some identification going on, some fixation on a certain content. And the prescription in Buddhism would be, notice that and return to your basic aliveness and notice the field in which the contents are coming and going. And hopefully, we can find a way to allow them to come and go freely. Suzuki Roshi puts this, give your cow or sheep a big meadow. That's the best way to control them. So it's actually, by not controlling them, he redefines what control means. By not controlling and manipulating them, you return to the quality of aliveness, which is indeterminate, open. Now, in this task, I call it a task, I don't know, that might change, I don't like the word particularly there, but in this task of bringing aliveness to your life, it's like a task of incorporating these disturbing and promising qualities of self-fulfillment, undividedness, indeterminacy, or maybe you just call it openness, and responsiveness. How to live out our lives, which will have the narrative structure of past and future, how to live out our lives and maintain the presence of these qualities. Johnny, who's sitting here, right here, pointed me to what would you call him? An author, but, a blogger of sorts, who lives in Boulder, and he's a Vajrayana, a practitioner of Vajrayana Buddhism, and an engineer who writes about AI and Buddhism. His name is David Chapman, and so Johnny said, check this guy out. Maybe we can invite him. So I'm thinking about he can be a guest speaker sometime. I'd like to meet him. And so I looked at the stuff that he writes, these books that are kind of unfinished, and they're just on the internet, and they continue to develop, and it's kind of fun. And he has, one of these book projects is called Meaningless. And he's asking meaningless, he made up the word. And he's asking about the meaning of life, basically, is how I understand it. Meaning not in a semantic way of like, this means that, but meaning in the sense of how to live a fulfilled life. And he's very much committed, as far as I can tell, to the idea of a middle way. So it's like, there's always extremes in our attitude that we can fall into and fixate on. We can fixate on the idea that everything has meaning. That would be, in Buddhist terms, this would be related to the false view of eternalism. There's like, eternalism is like there's God and there's eternal meaning, and you need to just tap into your eternal meaning, or your soul, or you have a purpose in life, find it. There's a mission, you'll carry out the mission. If you find your mission, you'll be a happy person. That would be the extreme of an eternalist view. And then there's a nihilistic view, which is the other extreme, which is everything's meaningless, nothing matters, everything is just particles, they swirl around in space. You are just particles, you swirl around in space. So don't worry, doesn't matter anyway, it's meaningless, it's nihilism. Okay. And I see his project as like a middle path in all kinds of ways. Now, without going into it, you can check it out yourself. Meaningless, David Chapman, it's a website, you can find it. But there's something that hit me in his discussion of meaningless, which he has under the, if I remember correctly, under the headline of purpose, because so much of the meaning of life is now being discussed in our culture as like, what's your purpose, right? And he advises, so how I read it, he advises to treat this basically metaphysical question of what's the meaning of life, but what's the meaning of my life is what concerns most people. He advises to transform this rather metaphysical question into just a practical one. And it's and the phrase that he gives is enjoyable usefulness. And when I saw that phrase, it should have hit me. It's like, that's exactly how I think about this. I just haven't used those words, but now I allow them to shape my attention, okay? Because I think it could be said differently. And there are people in his blog book that say like, oh, I don't like the word usefulness here. Why do you say enjoyable, right? So just look past the words a little bit into what is being touched on here. And I think it's very intelligent. Not just intelligent, it is really good advice. But when I feel into that from my distinction that I've made in this talk of aliveness and life, and how to live out our life by maintaining the presence of aliveness. It's like the usefulness that David is pointing to has something to do with with going along with the responsive order that is already built into our aliveness. So, for example, if you're hungry and then you eat, that's useful. Keeps you alive. In that sense, eating when hungry is a meaningful event. It creates meaningless, he would say, in your life, because you're responding in a useful, appropriate manner to hunger. And likewise, when you're tired and your body is exhausted, you create a meaningful event if you go and use sleep. Now, if you use sleep to avoid things in your life, you just stay in bed and you sleep and you're lazy, then sleeping is not useful. And then it's not meaningful. You will feel that you live a meaningless life if you just use your sleep to avoid things, right? It's just obvious. And when there are people who are in need and you have the skills to help them and you respond to that, then what they receive from you is useful and there will be a feeling of meaning. So I think that's how I read the term usefulness here. That it is like in this response, what I call this responsive order, there's usefulness appears as a quality of interaction. And if you interact with your own body, fine, then that's also an interactive sense, and the usefulness appears there. And in every situation, that's the indeterminacy and openness of our life, or of our aliveness, is like what exactly needs to happen, is determined by the situation. What is useful isn't predetermined. It emerges from the circumstances. And if we can lead a life in which our useful responses are also satisfying our sense of nourishment, that's the enjoyable part here. If we can lead a life in which we match, what we have come to be in this very moment, if we match our aliveness with what the circumstances require, we can find a joy in that. We can make this really simple. It's like if you live a life in which you do work that you never enjoy, the result is to feel that that my life is meaningless. If I do that, and let me stay with the perspective currently, if I work and I find no joy and nourishment in that, at some point it's like, this is meaningless what I'm doing. Likewise, if you do work that you enjoy, but it's not good for anything. Nobody benefits, including you. It's like your life falls apart while you're doing that. Like artists can be in that place. They enjoy what they're doing, but nobody appreciates it. Like nobody wants to buy the art. Nobody. Maybe you continue and you find that meaningful enough because you're just doing what you are enjoying. But most artists will feel like without an exhibition, without people seeing the art, without anybody finding it beautiful or useful to look at, it's like at some point you just give up. It's like, I don't know, it mustn't make sense. It's not meaningful. So I find this very useful, this phrase, enjoyable usefulness, because there's a very practical way in which we can assess what we're doing in this moment in our process, in our living process of carrying the present into the present. You can ask simply, is it enjoyable? Is it useful? Hopefully both. It frees us from falling into nihilism where it's like, oh, it's all meaningless, doesn't matter what I'm doing, because it does matter. It also frees us from meaningfulness in a kind of fixated way where you have a preconceived idea of what's meaningful, because in this, from the point of view of aliveness, that's indeterminate, responsive, undivided, always connected with others, without falling into the false idea of oneness. It's what has meaning can change and evolve. It's just like, it's not a fixated thing. It's something that emerges from incorporating, I don't know, that's a weird word, embodying aliveness in the midst of living out our lives. Thank you very much.